Hello and welcome to Professor Patrick Byrne from Boston College, Emeritus Professor of Philosophy and a recent author of a book on ecological ethics, about which we'll talk in a moment. Patrick was also here in Rome with a group of professors from Boston College who have been doing a one-year fellowship on Catholic identity of the university, integrating Catholic values into their diverse disciplines, really, with the special use of Bernard Lonergan. That is both Pat and myself have specialized in as an academic focus. So that's Pat. As you know, we're presenting this recorded video as part of the workshop in our conference, 10 Years of Laudato Si, Challenges and Hopes. And this is the workshop, the future of theology in such a context, promoting integral ecology. So you'll note that, of course, Pat is a philosopher, but I think we all cannot agree, without good philosophy, there will not be good theology. But Pat also has theological thoughts. So in part it's Pat and it's part me. So this is we're both going to talk a little bit about some thoughts that we have to prompt the longer discussion in this workshop, the future of theology in the age of integral ecology. So Pat, if we could start, can you tell us a little bit about your book, about yourself, but about your book on ecological ethics?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation, this conference. It's an absolutely essential and vital set of concerns, and I'm glad to be participating in this. I was at a similar conference at Marquette University in the United States in March. And again, that was also dedicated to looking at the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si. My book, which was just published, it actually just came out in March of 2024, is entitled Toward Environmental Wholeness. And the foundational word there is wholeness. And in the book, I take up the history of efforts to think about ethical responses to the environment, and particularly ethical responses to the environment as the field of environmental science began to develop. The field of environmental science and the field of climate science is just barely 100 years old. And among other things, the scientists had to face the question of how can I, as a chemist, as a physicist doing spectroscopy, as a geologist studying the formation of limestone under the oceans, how can I take the work of my colleagues from very different disciplines and bring those different diverse findings together to get an understanding of a whole that has all those parts to it. And this methodologically, this was a challenge. Scientists who were trained, for example, to do laboratory botany suddenly found themselves trying to do botany in an environment where all the controls were let loose. They couldn't keep things in test tubes. They couldn't keep things in refrigerators and sealed cases to control for variables. They were out in an environment where all the variables were being mixed up all together. So it was a real challenge to start to think not in a very highly specialized fashion, but in a holistic fashion. So the first part of my book is tracing how scientists and then ethicists were faced with a challenge of how do you think about a dynamic whole, a whole that's very complex, a whole that's very hard to understand, a whole that has mineral and atmospheric and hydrological and botanical and animal and human variables all mixing together. And so it's been a very fascinating thing to just learn the history of how the scientists overcame that. And if I can jump ahead to the occasion for this conference, what I found most compelling, I think most people find most compelling in Pope Francis's Laudato Si, is what he calls integral ecology. And integral means looking at a whole. And while the scientific community was following its methods to understand this complex, dynamic, interacting whole that involves not only natural environments, but human activities, Pope Francis especially brought together the fact that the whole includes a divine participant, God. And so Pope Francis, of course, thinks of the integral ecology as three fundamental components. So there's God, there's the natural environment, and there's humanity in their proper relationships to one another. And as he says in the letter, when one of those relationships is disrupted, it disfigures the rest of the relationships. So thinking about that whole is of the utmost importance for theology. I would say I am a philosopher, but I have some theological training, and I have done some writing in topics related to theology. So I can't make big pronouncements about what theology ought to be doing, but it seems to me, especially in light of Laudato Si, learning how to think holistically of the divine partner and the relationships between the divine partner, the human partners, and the natural environment partners, and their proper relationships to one another is really, really important. What I've done in the book is to think about how to bring together thinking ethically and scientifically. Now, for a variety of reasons, some very good ones and some oversimplified, there's a tendency to think that if we're doing science, we leave values aside. And if we're doing values, that's a more subjective thing, and it doesn't really have anything to do with scientific method. What I've tried to do, drawing on what I've learned from my many years of studying the work of Bernard Lonergan, is to show that there's a trajectory of thinking where our ethical thinking begins with properly understanding the situation that we're in. And that a great deal of harm happens when people have misunderstood situations and gone ahead and done what they think are pious moral activities without properly understanding the realities that they're in. Science plays an important role in helping us understand the realities we're in, but science is not the total understanding of all the realities we're in. And science doesn't give us the methods for thinking ethically about once we have a scientific understanding of our environment, whether it's natural or the water or the air or the changes in the climate temperature and all the complexities that brings about. Science doesn't tell us how to think ethically about that. And I've tried to develop a way of thinking about how we've got a responsibility for understanding the whole scientifically, and then understanding the whole of the sphere of values and their proper relationships to one another, and that we have to bring those two together. And in the book, I develop how I think Lonergan has given us some guidance for doing that.
Right. Yeah. Could you then just talk about, I'm going to talk with you maybe later about the properly theological moment and exactly how it relates to the ethical moment, for example. Could you talk a little bit about the GEM Fellows? You know why I'm asking this.
Sure. So we have a program at Boston College. It's now in its 5th year that I started. It invites people and our faculty and staff at Boston College to come together, and we meet in a spring semester for a seminar. We meet for 6 sessions, and it's an introduction to help them think about the mission of Boston College, which itself is an endeavor to understand the relation between intellectual advancement, intellectual excellence, and disciplines, and to care for the members of the community, especially our students, and the Catholic and religious dimension of the university, to think about that mission statement, we have an uncommonly long mission statement, which brings those components into a vision, which is certainly to say only a vision, not yet
The whole university.
the whole university. But then we hire people who are specialists in this and specialists in that, and in their training before they come to the university haven't necessarily had the time or the opportunity to think about how does their specialized set of skills and disciplinary methods, how does that relate to something larger, something whole? And so the GEM Fellows is an opportunity for folks who are open to that as a possibility to come together and to learn some ways of thinking about that, to look in the depths of their heart at the mission statement of the university, and to begin to think about not what do I do in my specialized set of skills alone, but how do those specialized sets of skills and myself, how can they fit into this broader vision of the university that cares for the whole person? So we use the phrase cura personalis at Boston College, and that means that we take seriously both the students' ethical and social development, their religious development, their spiritual development, and their intellectual development. That's a tall order, and certainly in the 20th and the 21st century, universities have gotten away from even any idea of how to go about doing that. So we bring together anywhere from 6 to 10 people. We spend a spring semester investigating different ways of thinking about this. We rely on the work of Bernard Lonergan to help us think about those issues. And then at the end of that spring semester, each person identifies a project that they're going to undertake at the university to further the mission of the university, something within their discipline. So the group that was with us here today, we had professors from the nursing school, from sociology, from English literature, a poet, from the library, and from economics, and who am I forgetting? There was a 6th person. So those people were represented. They each did a very individual, creative project, identifying something that they thought needed attention in the university. And they spent the following academic year implementing this project, working with students on loneliness, for example. The sociologist professor did a course for seniors to reflect on their lives using the Ignatian Examen in relationship to the works of R.J.J. Tolkien. And it was just a marvelous thing to see how, given this opportunity to think and to implement something in this way, the kinds of things they did and the benefits that it's brought to the university, to its students. And in some, oh yeah, that's right, the other person was from human resources, and she focused on, and when there's difficulties that arise, disciplinary difficulties that arise within the staff, how do you bring about reconciliation? So she's bringing a restorative justice approach to disruptions within relations within the workforce to restore the community. So these are some of the things that we do with the GEM Fellows program at Boston College.
And GEM means what?
Oh, so GEM is an abbreviation for a technical term from Bernard Lonergan's vocabulary. It stands for Generalized Empirical Method. The reason he uses the word generalized is he understood that there's a methodical way of reflecting on our internal experiences, what he called the experiences of consciousness. And those would involve the experiences of paying closer attention to things in our world, paying attention especially to the questions that arise within us, questions which we often dismiss and ignore, often at our own peril, and certainly socially at our peril when a society ignores questions. To paying attention to how we come to answers to those questions, paying attention to the feelings that we have about what is good and what is evil in our world, and paying attention to how we go about making good and objective decisions. So it's a method that extends from the sense experiences of the external world to incorporate a method for reflecting on the experiences that we have in our own consciousness of thinking and deciding and loving.
Okay, thank you so much. I had the honor of accompanying these fellows as they were presenting their final year report. They come to Rome, to the Gregorian, to do that. It has been absolutely uplifting. So can I try to spontaneously produce a few theological thoughts, or maybe you could even ask me any questions if you want. So relating theology to what Pat has been saying, but maybe before that, I repeat, without good philosophy, there's no good theology. We note what he was saying about the GEM fellows, how closely related it is to our talk of yesterday about the university as a laboratory of culture. So actually, a first comment I want to make about, well, theology and its relationship with philosophy is that there is an autonomy to philosophy. And, nobody's forcing the professor of physics of Boston College to be a Catholic, for example. What we are talking about is encouraging the authentic use of reason, really. And this is the point about the generalized empirical method. But being capable of this and doing this are two different things. Certainly Bernard Lonergan invokes the very classical Christian theological principle of, well, fallen human nature. We have a potentially good human nature, but we just don't use it. So there is sin, there's bias, there's the distorted habits that we inherit from our culture. So this great ideal that we've been enunciating, as often as not, doesn't happen. So theology makes, well, to use Lonergan's terminology, religious conversion prompts a development from above, which heals development from below. So you can talk about intellectual conversion and moral conversion as development from below. We're capable of this. But in practice, we just don't do it. So there is this supernatural intervention, to use that old-fashioned terminology, that occurs in the heart of everybody if they're open to it. This invitation to graced transformation by God. That can then kickstart the process of moral and intellectual regeneration and holistic operating. So that's really a first thing. Where does theology enter this? Allow me some sort of random thoughts in a way, but looking at society, grace is already at work. So Lonergan will say, as well as vectors of progress and decline in society, there is already at work a vector of redemption, which involves the reversal of decline and the promoting of progress. So social analysis always involves being able to identify all three. Now, in many ways, the theologian is incompetent in the details of progress. Not bad on the details of decline, although that ethics can handle the biased divergence from authentic progress at a social cultural level. But theology deals with an understanding of what is graced transformation in the subject and how to spot that already happening in culture, and then how to be a catalyst of its happening more. So the redemption of culture, the redemption of history as being the proper task of theology. Another phrase for the function of theology. Theology mediates between a cultural matrix and the significance and role of a religious tradition within that matrix. So just finally turning to ecology, obviously the damage to the environment is the mother really of all demonstrations of decline in our culture at the moment, because if it keeps going, we'll be so destructive of ourselves that so many other ills follow. So likewise, the appeal for integral ecology is primarily an appeal not just to fellow Christians or other even religious people. So it's primarily a philosophical appeal to integrate certainly ethics with all the other scientific dimensions of being concerned for ecology. But in the end of the day, just putting it sociologically, the importance of theology is going to be that, well, religion helps motivate people to have the kind of ethical concern that can include integral ecology. Just two more points, if I may. What about the state of theology? Is Catholic theology, Christian theology, ready for this task of really integrating a rather central concern for integral theology? Obviously, we're talking about eternal things as well in theology and Jesus Christ, but integral ecology has to be very important in theology. A couple of principles from Lonergan, two phases of theology. Theology has to retrieve the tradition and it has to mediate it to culture. But it's a mediation. So likewise, listening to culture has to influence the manner of retrieving of the spiritual tradition. Now, I just have a very exaggerated statement to make, or a concern to express. I fear that the state of Catholic theology at the moment can be divided between those who do the first phase and those who do the second phase. Between perhaps the theology departments of Catholic universities and the seminaries. So the Catholic universities can be very attentive to the signs of the times, but how anchored are they in the religious tradition and the nourishment in this flexible, ongoing way that can come from a command of the tradition. And then, of course, conversely, in a place like the Gregorian University, the more seminary mentality, there is still an obstacle, not just to ecology, but to considering the signs of the times as a source of theology on par with scripture and tradition. So can you be equally scientific when you are engaging in a theological response to ecological questions as when you're studying some church father of the past? So that's my 2 cents into this discussion. So if you have anything to add, Pat?
Well, as I said earlier, I'm not in a position to make any pronouncements about what theology should or should not be doing. But maybe I could add just a bit to it, what Father Whelan was just saying about theology's role in addressing particularly the challenge of climate change and the environmental crisis. In my way of thinking, theology is to a large extent a reflection on grace. And grace primarily as the gifts of the Holy Spirit and the gifts of our Lord Jesus Christ to bring something into the world that the world could not do by itself and could not continue to exist without. There's the phrase that I've learned, and I honestly don't know whether it came from St. Augustine or somewhere else, the Latin phrase of gratia sanans and gratia allevans. The way I understand those in translation into English, it's the grace that heals, gratia sanans, and the grace that uplifts, gratia allevans. And I think in Laudato Si, Pope Francis's vision of integral theology is very deeply informed by both of those. So let me say how that works. Very central to Pope Francis's message in Laudato Si is that what Catholicism and Christianity, and I think also Judaism, bring to the conversation that often can be a conversation among scientists and people in the secular, political, social, economic world, very secularized. What Christians, Catholics, and other religious people bring to the conversation is, as he says, the notion of creation. Essential to the notion of creation is that what God pronounces on the seventh day, and God saw that everything was very, very good. And it's up till then, everything has been good, but only when the wholeness was completed was God able to pronounce it to be very good. So there's a goodness about the wholeness of creation. And creation understood not just as the natural world or even the natural and human world, but creation understood as being what it is because it has a relationship to the infinite goodness of God. So God saw that it was wholly good, and God saw that that holy goodness was related and intrinsically dependent on the unrestricted goodness of God. Now, what Pope Francis says, this brings something to the conversation that is beyond the scientific discussion. It brings for people who can really tune in to the grace, that's the grace of uplifting, is that everything in the world has a preciousness to it. Everything in the world has its own intrinsic value, but that intrinsic value is related to a value that's greater than everything else. Now, one of the things that happens in discussions in ecological ethics is that people who become very inspired to work in this field tend to become a little romantic about it, in the sense that nature is pristine, and it's good, and human beings do nothing but are predators to it and harm it. That's not envisioning a wholeness. The wholeness of the integral ecology that Pope Francis, maybe he will be St. Francis, but Pope Francis has put forward is that there's a goodness to the whole as the way it is in God's created order. Now, among the created order is the fact that that animals feed off of plants. And in the animal world, some animals are prey and some animals are predators. There's a lot of violence in the world. And yet, and we get a hint of this in Genesis, where among the things that are created in the sixth day is the Leviathan, this great sea monster. And that's part of the whole goodness as God understands it. And so we have to understand the goodness of the whole as a goodness that involves some things that we might think, well, God wouldn't have created a violent world. Well, God did create a world in which there is violence and predation. And that's a very mysterious kind of goodness, that God can bring a whole goodness out of things that have some violence to it. And so then that puts the human interaction with the natural world in a very strange and mysterious and complicated and challenging way to understand. Human beings are not extrinsic to nature. Human beings are part of that created order that God uplifts, and grace brings to us as human beings the possibility of thinking about that whole as a goodness that has a profound sacredness to it. And that makes us think about how our responsibility to that natural world is different. As far as gratia sanans, the grace that's healing, for many people who are involved in caring for the environment and caring for the world, and especially that are concerned about the impending crisis or the present crisis of climate change, they can become quite despairing and say, everything I do gets shot down, it doesn't matter, there's no hope. Well, in Laudato Si, Pope Francis talks about hope in 11 different places. That the emphasis on the goodness of creation is more noticeable because he really showcases it very prominently when he's talking about integral ecology. But he also talks about hope. And there's Father Whelan and I had a conversation earlier about the difference between optimism and hope. And there's, of course, many different ways of saying what that difference is. But what's specific to the Christian hope is the hope that, to the extent that we think seriously and we work to understand things as best we can and as accurately as we can, And we work to try to understand as best we can what we are called to do in our particular circumstances, whether we're a scientific researcher or a teacher of theology or an engineer working in the electrical business or a person in banking or a person raising children. Whatever we do, if we do it with the most serious thoughtfulness we can, and the most serious thoughtfulness about what the right thing to do in response to the realities of our situation, that God is going to take that and put it into an order that's a good order. And for that, we need hope. And the gift of hope is the hope that God will make out of our best serious efforts at thinking and acting and loving what we ourselves could not make.
Great, thank you very much. Pat is more of a theologian than I am. So.
I don't think that's true.
Just two thoughts. Intrinsic in what you're saying is the role of the human person in the order of creation. For those of us who believe that God became a human and that there is a day of judgment, there's an eschatological fulfillment, the elevation not only of humans, but of all creation. Christ will become all in all. So how do we get our heads around that in a conference like this? So thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
We hope this is helpful for the further discussion in this workshop. And of course, we're recording this because Pat has not been able to stay on here in Rome and be with us for the conference. So thank you again, Pat.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.